Oh, wow. We're going straight in. I like that. Okay, how would I define sexism? Like an official definition or mine? How would I?
Your definition.
Okay, I would define sexism as inequality based on gender, or inequality based on sex, actually. So sexism is kind of anything, behaviour, systems, language that treats somebody differently but treats somebody worse. Somebody's coming off worse in that situation because of their sex or perceived sex. I think it is not fair on schools, the amount of expectation on schools to kind of solve every problem in society. So my parents are both retired teachers. You know, safeguarding wasn't much of a thing when they were teaching. It wasn't talked about in the same way as it is today. And, you know, my stepdad would be like, I got into teaching to teach maths. I didn't get into teaching to have to teach about, you know, FGM or forced marriage or something. And I think, first of all, you know, times have changed and we need to provide for all of a child's needs, but it can't all be put on schools. It can't be that schools are having to almost sort society out. Actually, the government has a responsibility, and they need to fund support services, and they need to fund domestic abuse refuges, and they need to fund children's centres in deprived areas to support people right from the start, rather than basically saying we've got a problem in society, schools aren't doing their job. Not addressing it at all or addressing it too late. I think not providing an avenue for children to report issues that feels safe for children to use, if that makes sense. So we obviously have this kind of culture of don't snitch, but actually that only serves the people who already have the power and are harming others. But what it means is we have lots of young people being affected by misogyny, thinking, oh, I can't tell, I'm not allowed to tell, because there'll be an impact on them. And so actually I think schools need to make sure they have got some process where children can raise something and no one will know that they have reported it, or at least try to, which isn't easy. Having been, you know, a member of staff in a school doing Dr. Harold's role, you know, it's not always easy. Sometimes people guess that someone has told you something, but having those avenues and also creating a culture where children can come and report about their friends. You know, I'm worried about my friend, this is what's going on, I want to tell you, but I don't want to get in trouble, I don't want her to fall out with me. So having that culture of children being able to share when they have concerns is really important. Oh, wow. What I would say is it's one of those, so we work with schools kind of all different types. We work with independent schools, we work with academies, we work with primary, secondary, you know, special schools. Sexism and misogyny is one of those safeguarding issues that kind of crosses everywhere. There are some safeguarding issues that come up more in certain areas that are linked to poverty, for example. But sexism and misogyny, really, you see it everywhere, unfortunately. So in terms of patterns, I think certainly sharing of indecent images, demanding of, you know, boys usually, not always, but boys demanding indecent images from girls. And then those being shared, kind of revenge porn issues, nasty, really nasty kind of sexualised bullying following those incidents. Patterns perhaps kind of lower level comments. So staff feeling very confident to challenge something if it was really serious, but kind of letting the lower stuff go, or not really knowing how to handle the lower stuff. And kind of non-verbal stuff, I think, is trickier to tackle, but it's there. So things like, you know, Dr. Harold said earlier, gave the example of in a school that he used to work in, whenever they'd announce kind of the sports team's results, for example, they'd always give the boys' football team results before the girls' football team, or the boys' rugby team results before the girls' hockey team results. And it was just such a subtle thing, but actually it sends the message, this is more important than this. So I think those subtle things can be there. And it doesn't help, I think, that what we can often see is that schools are staffed by mainly women, so it's mainly women in kind of teaching and school roles. But when we get to those higher levels, senior leadership team, head teachers, principals, we tend to see that much more, those roles being filled by men, which I guess is kind of reflective of the rest of society. That doesn't help really, because again, it's so important for boys and girls and non-binary students to see themselves reflected in those roles. So kind of inequality and a lack of diversity within the staff can have an impact on the children and the aspirations that they have. Another pressing concern is how we are intersectional. And of course, I, like everyone else, I'm still definitely on a learning journey with this, but making sure we recognise kind of intersecting inequality. So looking at, do you know what, when we are thinking about misogyny, are we thinking about how misogyny affects children with special educational needs and disabilities? What other layers of inequality are affecting that person? Are we being fully kind of inclusive and intersectional when we think about when we bring ethnicity into it? So thinking about misogynoir and how what misogyny might look and feel like to our black female students, for example, or what about our trans or non-binary students? How do they experience misogyny, and then what are the barriers for them to tell us and trust us that we will do something about it? Mm-hmm. So I think that's pressing, where we think about, if we're going to address misogyny, are we fully addressing it for every single person, every single individual with their own needs and their own, not necessarily vulnerabilities, but their own needs and their own other challenges, other fights they're having to fight? Are we making sure that it's fully kind of inclusive? I would say, you know, I work with loads of school staff and teachers, and I think 99.9% of them have got into this because they love children and want to do a great job. It's the systems that need to change